but now the levels are a little off. Do you see how jagged it is?
Mm-hmm.
So you can blend that out. You could either trim the high part, or you can put this on brown paper now and add to the low part, you know, whichever makes sense. You just be your best judge about kind of aesthetics. Okay, so I've just closed up a little bit here, and that's added some into the dart. The dart's just a little bit bigger. So after you're to this point, you'll put it on a folded piece of brown paper. We're adding 1/4 inch seam allowance, 1/4 inch seam allowance, 1/4 inch seam allowance, because these are the edges that would get finished by, well, this is the lining piece actually. This is where we're making the lining before we make the outer one. What we'll be doing is we'll be taking this guy, tracing it off and slashing it up to create the gathered one. And actually rewind. Before you put it on brown paper, I find it's easiest to create the copy when it's still dot paper form. That way you don't have to worry about removing seam allowance or anything. So this would actually be a perfect time to put it onto another piece of dot paper, cut them both out at the same time, okay? Then you don't have to worry about recontouring, you don't have to worry about removing seam allowance. So we're going to make a duplicate version of this before there's seam allowance. So I'm going to tape or staple this guy onto this paper, and I'm going to cut around the edges. I'm going to blend out this neckline kind of at the same time. I think I'm just going to chop off those little points, and then I'm going to cut around exactly around all of these edges. I'm actually going to cut out my dart allowance, that way I can draw in something nicer in the middle, and then cut around the edge, okay? After you've got that cut, then the lining piece, you'll add your seam allowance. We're doing 1/4 inch seam allowance on neckline and armhole edges. We're doing 1/2 inch seam allowance on this shoulder seam, 1/2 inch on the side seam, 1/2 inch on the waist. Now the dart, we're going to do like we did those exercises, where we're going to back off a certain amount for the dart point, back off 1/2 inch for the punch hole, and then we're going to cut out a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now, I backed off 1 inch, and I think that worked out okay. I was looking at that. So we're going to back off our dart by about 1 inch. Usually when it's one dart and it's at the side, we want to back off a fair amount. You could even do 1 1/4 inches. So 1 inch to 1 1/4 inches for the vanishing point, 1/2 inch for the punch hole, and then draw in your seam allowance. Keep in mind, this dart will get pressed down. So do you see this little jagged edge? That happened by folding that dart down before cutting the side seam.
How much did you back off from the apex, you said?
1 inch.
Or
You
1
could do
inch.
1 to 1 1/4. Okay, so I'm going to put this up. I'm going to cut out so I have a second thing, and I'll save that second bodice for later. We're going to chop it up.
So the lining